Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode here on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm so excited that you're here and for this amazing conversation with an incredible guest today. Angela Pryder is here joining us. Angela, welcome to the show. I'm deeply honored and excited to have this conversation with you today.
Oh, Danny, thank you. Thank you, Danielle. It's really, really good to be here. I'm excited too.
Yes. This is going to be great. And I think we should start off because there's so much that we can talk about today, and I'll try to keep us on track because there's like so many questions that I have for you. And as I shared in the introduction, I know you personally and I've worked with you personally and hope to continue working with you personally in the future. But for those who are not familiar with you yet, maybe you can share a little bit of your backstory. You know, what is it that really got you into this beautiful work you're doing today? You know, your shamanistic path, your path into plant medicine and spirit medicine, and all the beautiful things that we're going to talk about today.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. It's interesting because when people, ask me about how I got onto this path, the first thing that I say is like, this was not a career choice. It wasn't a career choice. It was that I received the gift of desperation from the universe because I was in a healing crisis, and I was in therapy for childhood trauma. I was in Jungian therapy for childhood trauma. I was facing some very serious alcoholism, and through one of these group sessions in this Jungian therapy group I was in, we were guided into a journey, and later I came to understand I had what's called a spontaneous shamanic experience where I met my ancestors and I received a healing. And I did tell the therapist after the group because I was like, oh, I didn't go where they went. Am I all right? Am I mentally unstable? And she just kind of she just said to me, I think that that's really significant and you should pay attention to that. I was very newly sober. I was maybe only a month sober. And I discovered that, every day when I did this meditation where I would go and talk to these ancestors, and I would, go on this journey and that I would receive a lot of help and a lot of healing. So that's kind of how the doorway opened for me. And then later I really came to understand. I came to put together, a bunch of like breadcrumbs that helped me to understand, like a big part of me drinking and getting so deeply immersed in alcoholism and also us really misusing cannabis as well was because I was a sensitive child, and I did from an early age, I had a very, very deep connection with nature and with God. I grew up Catholic, and I had like visitations with Mary, and I had seen spirits, and I like, who the hell was I going to talk to about that? Nobody. So all of this came out, and then I was part of a recovery community and part of a spiritual community. I joined a women's group, a women's circle where we studied like feminine spirituality for about 2 years. And I'm still friends with some of those women like 30 years later. And they're still like my bedrock in life. And then it was when I was about 4 years sober that I went to this open house and met my first teacher. And then it just kind of went from there. Like it was about 5 years after that first experience that I even heard the word shamanism. And then, anyway, I won't give you the full story, but I've been really, really blessed on my journey to just kind of show up at places with these amazing teachers, here in Canada and Australia and Peru and Ireland. who are like really, they're generally older and they're generally very humble people. And so through that process, I've been gifted with a lot of these wisdom teachings and practices and bits and pieces. And after I'd been on my path, I went back to school, when I was about 4 or 5 years sober, and I began a career as a counselor, and I worked for 10 years, mostly as an addictions counselor in different kind of drug rehab places. And I worked on the downtown east side for a while. But after I had my daughter, I'd been on the shamanic or animist path for about 20 years. And I just, I went into full-time practice, like, because I had done my somatic training by this point, and I started to weave together somatic therapy with shamanic or spiritual healing. And I was like, whoa, man, this is a whole different thing. Like, nobody, when I did all of that stuff, like none of this, people didn't even know what shamanism was. But when I had her, I was like, I don't want to miss out. I waited a long time to have her. And I was like, so I went into full-time practice, and then I just got busy, 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 super, super busy. And then in about 2012, I'd been going over to Ireland by this point. I'd been doing these series of ancestral pilgrimages. And then in 2011, 2012, in my healing practice, I don't have anything romantic or glamorous about how I came to start to work with plant medicine. But in my healing practice, I started to have a series of women come to see me who had been sexually violated in plant medicine ceremony. Some of it had occurred here in Canada, in Vancouver, and some of it had occurred in other countries. And it was so disturbing. And it was really disturbing. And I think that there was a part of me that was like, I was working somatically and I was doing all those things that I could do. But there was a part of me that began to be curious about entheogens, or plant spirit medicine, and kind of had this feeling of like, maybe I'm meant to work with this. But I was a little concerned because I was clean and sober, and I had my own concerns about that, even though it would have been like 20 years or whatever. But I don't know, but the way that I've always gone on my path is I have a dream. That's what happens. I have a dream. I speak to a teacher, an elder. I get it verified. And then fairly shortly after, the next piece will unfold. And that's just been how things happen. So I had this dream. And then I spoke to a friend of mine, and she's like, oh, you need to talk to my teacher. And then like within 3 weeks, I was at my first retreat and sitting in a plant medicine ceremony, and then it all like unfolded from there. I spent sort of 5 years, I would say, like deeply immersed and apprenticing. And I already was teaching my shamanic apprenticeship by this point for probably about 6 or 7 years. And I started to see these sort of connections between what I've been doing, like with shamanism or animism, and the psychedelic world. And then I kept those two worlds like separate for, I don't know, about 10 years. And I was teaching my shamanic practice, and I was also supporting at plant spirit medicine ceremonies. And then in about 2016, I was on pilgrimage in Ireland, and my teacher just said to me, like, it's not really your path to work with plant medicine from the jungle. You really should be working with psilocybin because it's your ancestral medicine. And because in the apprenticeship I was already teaching, and I had been studying the old folk healing ways of my ancestors in Ireland for a long time by that point. And then I went into ceremony with psilocybin, and it's like everything in my entire journey of, shamanism, animism, the medicine path just came into alignment. And then there it is. There's the story.
Wow. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I know that there's so much more to that, and we just don't have time for that. But this is, what a journey you've been on. And I just have to say, I mean, I'm so grateful for those pieces that have fallen into place for you, because as I shared in our intro already, you were the first person that I explored plant spirit medicine with psilocybin. And it was like just life-changing and put me on this path now. And it's so incredible. When we have those moments, right? And how all those little signs or little nudges come into our lives, meeting that one person or having that one experience or, just really beautiful. So thank you for sharing, a bit of what brought you into this. And I'd love to go now deeper into talking about psilocybin, because as I was sharing with you before this episode, this is something I haven't specifically pulled out and talked about on the podcast yet. I've talked about a lot of other psychedelics and a lot of other plant medicines, but this is one that's very near and dear to my heart, and I know yours as well. And who better to talk about it than you? So I would love, for anybody who's listening who may be new to this world or really misunderstanding or still stuck in sort of old mindsets and old beliefs, maybe you can start by explaining, like, what is psilocybin? People are starting to hear more about it, and how could it potentially support in our healing?
Yeah. So I'm not like a mycologist, right? And I'm not a scientist. I'm a spiritual healer, so I have a sort of a different way of looking at it, but I think that it can be very helpful to get a different point of view. And so in the world, we use this word psychedelic, right? But often when we talk about plant spirit medicine, which is my preference, because I feel like, psychedelics or plant spirit medicines, they are really ancient teachers. They have been used all around the world for thousands and thousands of years to help with healing, to help with the evolution of cultures, to help with, like, even look at architecture. Like, people like, oh my God, the pyramids, this, that. It's just like, yeah, they're downloading some stuff, man. And, the plants, like, the aqueducts and the pyramids in Mexico, all of these things, I believe, have been influenced by this incredible intelligence. And so the word that I really enjoy is this word entheogen. And entheogen, this word translates, literally means creating the divine within. And so its roots are Greek. So en means within, and theo, of course, is theology, is the divine. And then gen means to create. So when we are working with entheogens, we are reconnecting to the divine within us. And in the animist path that I teach is like so without, so within, and we are all connected. And so the entheogens are, I believe, they're it's the best word. They're guides that open doors to the divine. Now, psilocybin in particular, I've been working with this plant medicine for a long time. I think actually in our culture, I think like cannabis. I think in many ways, like, psilocybin has really been misused because it's become this recreational thing. You just pop a couple of mushies and, right, go rave. And that's fine. That's great. That can be its own spiritual experience. I like it. But it's not how I work with the plant medicines. And psilocybin is one of those plants that has been used around the world. It's been used in Europe. It's been used down in Mexico. People go into communion. In fact, I would say that some of the churches that have this sacrament of communion, that's part of the colonizing act, is that we're going to take away this ritual. and people were going into communion with plant medicine, plant spirit medicine for thousands and thousands of years. So I think that what I love about psilocybin, when I think about psilocybin and I think about mushrooms, like psilocybin grows in the woods, it grows in the shade, or it grows in the shit, right? And
Yeah.
I always say, like, what does it do in these places? It's a fungus, and therefore it's a decomposer. So what is so powerful spiritually about this teacher is that it teaches us to go down and within and look at the shadow. Like, what are we growing in the shade?
Yeah.
What is it that we're carrying around that we need to let decompose? And in our culture in particular, like, we're a death denying culture. Nobody likes letting go. We like everything that's new and young and sparkly. And whereas psilocybin is a teacher that when I think about psilocybin, when I think about the mushroom in and of itself, I think there is like the cap and there's the spores that float, right, when you're dancing at the rave. And then there's like the body, like the trunk of the psilocybin that's like, it's growing in the shade and it's got a lot of power. And this is the part that's like teaching us about decomposition. And then the mycelial network that goes down under the earth that is helping the trees to communicate, that it shows us all of the patterns in our life that we have hidden beneath the surface. So in that regard, it can be, having a communion, having a supported space to go into communion with this ancient teacher that teaches us about, hey, you need to take a look at this. You're hiding this in your shadow. And so often we're hiding the most beautiful things in the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're hiding these parts of ourselves. We're burying them down there. We don't want people to see. And then it's also showing us like, oh yeah, and that's connected to this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And then when we have this support to actually decompose these energies inside of us, then we have this awakening. And then we have like the dance at the rave, because then we're like, oh my God, now I know why I've been doing this thing my entire life. Yeah. So yeah.
Wow. So beautifully explained. I love this. And I loved learning that from you, even as I started learning, about this medicine and how it is here to show us. And, I really want to pull out that piece around death that you talked about, because I know so many of my listeners, so many of my clients, myself included, right? Like, this is one of our biggest fears, right? Fear of death. And, I've often personally seen that, as well as mushrooms, as such a beautiful tool to help us like surrender. I know in my own experiences with mushrooms, it's been that surrender to like, it's okay to die. It's okay for certain parts of me to die, or certain like things, to die off in my life. And also one day it's okay for me to die, because I will be supported. Like, there was always this sense of like, it's going to be fine. Like, after you die, it's going to be beautiful. Like, there's nothing to be afraid of. Like, look at the magic that exists here and how well you're supported. And yes, there's so much potentiality there. I just wanted to pull that out, as I know a lot of people really struggle with that fear of death and fear of letting go, like you said.
It's just a fear of letting go. It's like, this is one of the terrible maladies and crises that we're facing as a culture, as a people, is like, we're all like so full and so overstimulated, and you see it reflected everywhere. Everybody's overstimulated, everybody's overexposed, and we're dysregulated. So we just don't even know how to regulate out of our sympathetic into our parasympathetic, to go from that, that activation into that rest and digest. We don't even know how to do that anymore. A lot of people, how to let go. And when you're dealing with that level of input into our system, which we're not meant to have this much input coming in, it's more than we can digest. Like, I always say to people, like, we eat, but we don't just eat with our mouth. We eat with our eyes, we eat with our ears, like, we eat energetically, we eat through our skin, right? And when we have this much stimulation and information coming in, we are not built to digest all of that. It's too much. So Digestion is a huge part. Like even when I'm leading ceremony or I'm supporting people, I do, somatic psychedelic integration. And I find that a lot of people are going and doing psychedelics or being in ceremony, and their body hasn't even digested all of the medicine, let alone they're going into integration of it. So this is part, I think, of like the letting go is like, not only when we work with psilocybin do we begin to understand the concept of letting go, but we can actually learn the intricacies of how we let go.
Yeah. Yeah. I can
Consciously
fully
enough,
attest to that. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember going to my first journey with you. It was, my intention was like letting go of control. Like, what do I need to do to let go of control? Because that was the fear that held me back in so many areas of my life for so long. And I know many of my listeners, I'm saying this because so many of you also struggle with this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was such a powerful like awakening to that. And I've continued to be on that journey of surrender and letting go of control and knowing that
Yeah.
control is an illusion and all the stuff, right?
Totally. And
Yeah.
that's a good reason why we do the ceremony. Like I always learn that we do the ceremony in community, and why we do the ceremony with a really skilled or experienced facilitator, because of exactly these things, like letting go of control,
Yeah.
and I watch myself. I'll give you an example. Like, I notice myself, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of ceremonies, but I still have this thing at the beginning of the ceremony where I start to like fuss about the space. I'm like, okay, are things lined up? Where's my water? Where's my lip balm? Where's my flashlight? Where's my da 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 da? Okay, and I do this thing, and then I know when the medicine starts to arrive, because I'm like, oh, I'm still folding my blanket. Oh, and I watch myself doing this thing. And this is exactly the problem I have at nighttime when I'm going to bed with my bedtime routine.
Yeah.
I'm like, Angela, you're doing this thing. You're making sure. And then I thought, oh, and when I really look at that in a large way, like even when I've left relationships, I want to ensure, like when I was going through my separation, my conscious uncoupling with my ex, like that was a 5-year process of I want to make sure that, and I even know in my family, my parents are 87 and 88. We talk about death all the time, and they're highly organized and they have everything organized. And I can see that there is a limit to how much you can ensure that everything is organized before you let go. Sometimes you don't have that choice.
Right. Yeah, that's powerful. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious if you can share a little bit more now about like what a journey looks like. I know this is a question that a lot of my listeners will have, and obviously every practitioner does this differently, but I know you've spoken a few times to this already. What does a journey with you look like, or what do you recommend people look for if they are looking for support or curiosity? I know a lot of my listeners are in the United States. They might not want to fly up here and work with you. What are some pieces that you can speak to around that?
Well, you should definitely come up from the United States.
Absolutely.
Are you kidding? It's
Absolutely.
so beautiful. I never miss out on coming up here. Otherwise, we'll come down to you. But it's just so great up here. So what does a journey look like? Well, first of all, yes, I have a really good blog actually on my website called 28 Questions You Should Ask Yourself and a Potential Facilitator. This is 28
Awesome.
questions. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's just so that people can like make sure that, that this person really, really knows what they're doing. So what does a journey look like? Well, I'm a big believer in a really, really thorough assessment. And I've discovered over the years that the more people know me, the more comfortable they are letting go. Mm-hmm. So, I do a very thorough health assessment, because you have to ensure that, not everybody is right to work with the medicine. It's not right for everybody. There can be contraindications around medications. And sometimes people are going through very difficult things in their life and they think, oh, like as an act of desperation, I think I'm going to go and do this thing. I'm just, you know, you know, my mother died 2 months ago and I really think I should go do this thing. Well, maybe not, right? Or I'm just out of a big relational trauma and da da da. It's like, no, we have to remember that plant spirit medicines are amplifiers, and that's how they work. They go in to us and then they amplify those things that we're kind of not necessarily wanting to look at. That's how it works, amplification. And so we have to assess where people are at in their lives and if the timing is right, and if they're going to have enough time after the ceremony in order to be integrated, or to do the integration work. And we're also curious about what supports do they have in their life as part of their integration. So maybe they have a therapist, maybe they have a coach that they're working with, but we want to ensure that they've got lots of support and that they're going home to a supportive environment where they can have some space for themselves, yeah. Because like space and solitude are two ingredients of integration that are key. So that's the assessment piece. And then when we go into the ceremony, a lot of people sort of say to me like, oh my God, what can I expect? And I know for me, when I lead ceremony, I spend a lot of time talking about the protocol. And I just sort of say to people, I know that you're anticipating taking this medicine and you can't wait to get into it. But when I'm sharing the protocol of how we are going to be in the space together, what we're actually doing is weaving an energetic container. Because if you go into this world of plant spirit medicine, psychedelics, without the setting, that's what we call it in Western world, set and setting. If you don't have that, it's too the energy becomes can become reckless, right? So the container of the medicine is, I believe, after all these years, is actually the most important thing. Because if you have a really deep, rich container that has lots of support and lots of expertise and lots of regulation, then it becomes easier to let go. So once people understand, it also, we talk about the protocol because we want our mind to have something to attach to, right? We want the ego to go, oh, this is what's happening. Now I know what's going on, right? Because once we go into the medicine, the default mode network, like that regular way that we think of things, it gets put aside. Mm-hmm. And the ego has to take a back seat, and then we surrender. So I always say to people, the journey of the medicine actually inside us, I like to refer to the medicine spiral that I teach in the apprenticeship. So I say, when you take the medicine, you're waiting for it to arrive. There has to be some digesting. There has to be that process. And so quite often when we're in that, it's like being in the dead of winter. It's like the place is quiet, and sometimes people will start to feel restless, and you'll notice your mind, and your mind will be saying things to you like, oh my God, why am I doing this? Did I make, like the ego, it's like, did I make the right decision? Did I take enough medicine? Did I not take enough medicine? What if it works for everybody else, but not for me? What if it's all the fear of letting go comes up. So I share lots of techniques about how to get through that phase. And then often with psilocybin, when it arrives, the description that I use for people is it's kind of like a hummingbird effect. It's kind of like you can feel like you get this fluttering in your chest, and you can start to feel like there is this hummingbird feeling. Now, for people who have a history of panic attacks or anxiety, the mind will take that sensation and come to a conclusion that I'm having anxiety. But that's why I always talk about it beforehand. It's just like, no, this is the medicine arriving. It's letting you know that it arrived. And so you're going to tune into your breath. I'm going to surrender. And I'm right here. Like, if anybody needs any help, I'm right here. And so sometimes people need help. Sometimes they just need another nervous system by their side to regulate, to help regulate, to co-regulate. And then there is the part of the ceremony that's like the summer, right? It's like the busyness, the coming and the going, and these things are happening, and there's music, and there's all sorts of stuff, and there's healing, and there's crying, and there's laughing, and there's those kinds of things. And then there's the autumn, which for me is actually the most important part. And a lot of the time when people are in plant medicine ceremony, when the intensity of the medicine is worn off, people think it's over. But it's actually not. It's the most important part of the ceremony because it's where you have a little bit of agency. So I always say to people, this is the time when you're a little bit more online and you're sitting with an ancient teacher. So what do you want to ask that ancient teacher? And so often people will say these deep questions, like for me, I might ask, oh, I know that my parents are aging, they're elderly, and what can you show me what I need to do to prepare for that? You know, or often people will do what I call the soul to soul conversation. Like maybe there's somebody in their life that they really love, but they're, because of attachment styles or because of limitations, they can't have these really deep, intimate conversations where things get resolved. So I always say to people, like, just ask the medicine to put you with that person and have a soul-to-soul conversation with them. There's so much that you can resolve. So that's a precious time. And then we go into the integration phase, and that can go on for weeks. Yeah. Which is a whole other topic.
Yes, a topic for another day, and something I have talked about on the podcast before. And I appreciate that you're really bringing that in a few times here, talking about integration and about like really consciously stepping into this. Because I do know, and we've all heard stories, right, with people using these substances for partying, and like you said, or for reasons. And for me, I've also done, as someone who's also struggled with addictive tendencies, right? Like, how does this fit in? And really starting to, for me, understanding the difference between using a beautiful teacher like this as a teacher or using it as a way to also escape, right? So is it a numbing out escaping tool? Because it can be used like that. Cannabis can be used like that. LSD can be used like that. Like, all of these medicines can be used as a way to just party and ignore and hide, versus when, like you said, this beautiful sacred container, this safe space, when we're in the right environment, being supported as we should be, we're able to actually go into the stuff that we've been avoiding, right? And actually get the lessons from these teachers. And I think that's where my heart and soul lies as well in this work. And I know yours does. It's like, actually using these in a conscious way, not to say there's anything wrong with, taking a gram or two and going and having a good time, but, maybe even doing that more consciously than not. And I think tricky for everybody to feel into what feels right for them.
Yeah. And it is tricky, like taking the gram or two and having a good time, or like people who, for example, misuse cannabis, who is like a profound women's medicine and teacher, like, oh my God, cannabis, like, wow. She's just incredible. But the thing that I find, like a lot of people who come to me for like somatic psychedelic integration, quite often it's because they've had a bad trip. Yeah. And quite often, like, it's just like any medicine. Like, a lot of the time when people come to any circle that I do, like, they're like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. Like the music and the smells and the sounds and the relaxation. And it's almost like the medicine is like, yes, come on in. It's so beautiful in here. And then before you know it, you're like, oh my God, I'm in this place. And I hear this from people like, oh yeah, I stopped smoking weed because every time, I smoked weed, I would go into this loop, and it would be, I'd go into paranoia, and I would have this thing. And it's the reason why I stopped smoking cannabis, like way back in my early 20s, is that every time, I would smoke, I would have what I really now understand is childhood trauma was coming up. Mm-hmm. So what happens when people are having these challenging experiences that they might call negative or scary, is this the medicine is like, okay, you've had enough of a good time. Now, like, my medicine is really to show you your shadows. So we need to go and I'm going to show this to you. But people are like, no, this is really bad. I can't look. And, I took too much or it's somebody else's fault. It's like, no, you're within yourself. Like, you're in it, so it's tricky.
Yeah. And if you don't understand that about the medicine, it can be very confusing. It can be overwhelming. And if you're not in a safe space, if you're in a room full of people you don't trust, or in a house you don't know, or like in the woods by yourself, right? Like, there's so many places people put themselves in unsafe spaces, energetically, that then the stuff starts to come up and it's terrifying, right? And enter the bad trip, right? Versus being supported and being willing and have the tools to like see the shadow and work through that and know that you're not alone in that. I mean, that relational piece, I think is so important. And I'm sure you see that as well, right? Not being alone key in this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is key. It's like being able to feel like this person's got me. I was recently in a ceremony with somebody and I came alongside them, and there was a lot of freeze, right? And I could feel like, and I said, would you like me to hold your hand? And when I held their hand, I could feel, oh, wow, there's not much life here. And I mean, this is one of the bonuses of like having somatic training. I'm like, oh, there's not much life here. All right. And so I could go into doing some somatic work with them and helping them through. But it can be very, 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 very tricky when we don't have the right support. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So absolutely. Okay, this is so beautiful. I want to ask you this next. Obviously, you have so much wisdom in the spiritual realm, and I'm curious, what do you believe are right now, when we look at humanity, we look at like the planet, what do you think are some of the biggest spiritual challenges that we're facing nowadays, and how might adapting more of a spiritual path or belief systems maybe support us in overcoming some of these challenges or help in our healing? I mean, there's no doubt the planet is very sick on many levels, and humans and nature and all of that. And how do you believe that we can start to maybe support in that?
I do believe it is a spiritual solution. I don't believe it's a religious solution, but I do believe it is a spiritual solution. And I mean, there is quite a bit of talk starting to come forward about the meta crisis that you may or may not heard of it. But it's this idea that like there are multiple crises happening at the same time. And so now, because of social media and the internet, we are exposed to all of those things at the same time. And like it's just exactly what I was talking about earlier. It's more than we can digest. We also live in a culture where we put our elders away in like care homes. So we're a culture that doesn't have elders. So we don't have the wisdom keepers that are saying, oh yeah, like I remember during COVID, my dad's in his 80s. He was a child of the Second World War. He wasn't actually too fazed about it. He was like, oh yeah, this is, I was like, oh, okay. So I think that the meta crisis where all of these things are happening. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, with the online world, especially with social media, when I think about our kids, what it's done is it's created this illusion of separation between image and shadow. So a lot of people are on social media, with these Instagram moments, and they're not seeing behind the scenes, like I'm here on this podcast and, I'm all put together, but I've had an incredibly tough summer, right? So it's like that image and shadow are more separated now, I think, than ever. And sadly, we have the algorithm that tracks that. And so then the algorithm is feeding us food that is getting us more and more. So I would say that we have a neural crisis. We have a nervous system crisis is one of those crises where we're overstimulated and we're unable to regulate. And so I think this is one of the reasons why the somatic piece in my teaching is so important. And then I can see social paradigms are dismantling. And I'm glad about that. There's like a lot of social paradigms that we need dismantling. But when I look at what's happening with capitalism, and then I see like relationship paradigms, that's good. Like let's dismantle some of those things. But even gender paradigms, like there is when those paradigms break down, what it activates is a lack of certainty. And we as human beings, we like to be in control. Our egos require predictability, and we want to know what our role is. We want to know what we do. And if we do not have a strong spiritual path, then what happens is we are flapping in the wind. We are flailing. We feel groundless. And if we don't have anything to help steady us, then we can get really, really stuck. So, and in particular in our culture, we're so focused on the mind, right? We are not in our bodies. And social media and on the online world has also created even more of a split between the mind and the body. So I can see in my work when I'm working with people, the reason why I love to work with community. And even though I do teach online, I still do this work in person, is because we need to be with other nervous systems to co-regulate. We need to be examining our attachment systems and healing our attachment systems. So we can do those kinds of things in community. And then, of course, there's just like the climate crisis, right? It's like so much uncertainty. People are really also feeling quite powerless because we're so inundated with information that we can't digest. We don't know where to start. We don't know where to go. And I really think, like, my theory is that one of the reasons why it's difficult for us to deal with that is that so many of us have left our ancestral lands that our ancestors lived on for generations and generations. And we are not, so we don't understand a relationship with the land, where we don't know the spirit of the land. We don't know the journey of the trees there, the plants, the animals, those kinds of things. When we're disconnected from all of that. And that's because we're disconnected. So many of us are disconnected from our ancestors, right? So many people say to me, I think I want to go down to Peru and I want to do my healing. And I'm like, where are your ancestors from? Can you go there? Because that is a power play as far as healing goes. So ancestral healing, I think, is spiritual healing is key. And then we just have this massive crisis around meaninglessness. And I think it's because we feel powerless. Like, what can I do about the climate crisis? What can I do about capitalism? What can I do about the algorithm? What can I do? And so it's like, why am I even here? What's the point in it? And this is why I really love the animist path and why I really love plant spirit medicine, because it brings us back to the meaning of, like, why am I here? It's like, nature, when you're out in nature, every little thing that's going on there has a reason for being there. It's all interconnected. They're all working together. And it's the same with human beings. Like your beautiful Danielle, glorious medicine, and his Angela over here. We each have a very important role to play here. And so it can take some work to uncover that and to come home to our soul and to learn how to listen to our soul and our body again. But I think, yeah, there's this meta crisis, but I see it all as being completely rooted in a spiritual crisis. Yeah.
Yeah. So beautifully said. Like, as you were sharing all of that, I was like really deeply resonating, just even in my own path and my own, discovering, I guess, the keyword spirituality, right? Maybe about 10 years ago, starting to dip my toe into that world of like, there's more to this, and nature is connected, and I'm one, and what is my purpose, and like all of that. You mentioned earlier, again, I'm thinking of all the listeners here who struggle with this when we don't have some sort of belief of higher power or higher wisdom, right? It can leave us feeling so lost and so disconnected and so permanently afraid of life and everything. And for me, I know that that's been such a massive support in helping me through hard times, really, like with every cell in my being, trusting that I'm going through something that's helping me grow, and that's helping me learn something that my soul is meant to learn on this planet, and like, all the beliefs that I have. And like, that is so invaluable when you're going through, when the world is throwing everything at you. And like you said, right, we're so involved in everybody else's business around the planet and all the trauma that's happening and the horrible things that are happening. And, if we don't have some sort of anchor to come back to, we're going to just be lost. Right. And it's hard to come back from that.
It's true. And I think one of the symptoms of what we're dealing with here is we are being fed this story that we need to externally orient. Right? Yeah. So there's this whole thing that people it's even when people come to my, workshops or whatever, and I support people to meet like an animal ally, like a spirit of an animal that's going to support you. And I always say, do not go and Google this. Do not go and look up a book about this. And a lot of the work that I do is to encourage people, you need to go down and in, you need to go within. Why has this species of animal come to you? Just because so-and-so over there says that this wolf, if you have the wolf, it means this. Maybe that's from their lineage, from their culture, but that doesn't mean that that's the case for you. Mm-hmm. So we're very disempowered. I do think that is part of kind of one of the remnants of the spiritual wounding that so many of us have experienced through organized religion, is we get taught that person out there has the answer, when that person out there is supposed to be helping us to connect within to ourselves and supposed to be helping us to self-orient and to develop that really sovereign, steadfast self-attachment so that we can come back in and trust our intuition and trust our body, right? But, oh my God, the external orientation. And when it's too much, we just numb.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's confusing, right? And it's designed to be confusing. I mean, we can bring this back to talking about sugar, right? And you're talking about the medical system. I talk about this so much. I'm glad you brought that in here at the end, because I've talked about this on the podcast a lot, is like how disempowered we've become. We think everybody outside of us has the answer. I mean, I have so many clients who can't make a decision without asking 6 friends first, right? And how quickly we have been taught from a very young age to trust only your doctors or only your teachers or, your parents, all these power figures know what's best for you, and you can't trust yourself. That's the message that we get, and especially as women, right? And we've been stifled in our divine power of our intuition and our womb wisdom and all the magic that we carry.
It's just gaslights the shit out of us is what it does.
Yeah, it does.
We have internalized gaslighters.
Yeah. And, the role here, and I do this with my clients as well, as I often challenge them to an information detox. No more, like you said, don't do books, no podcasts, no summits, no, take a time off, even if it's a week or a day if you can. And what arises from that, right? We start to actually tune into our inner whispers, and it's oh, I actually have that answer within. And it's amazing what happens when we get still and silent. And I know you know this, but just reminding all of our listeners, we have all the answers, and we can use some of these plant medicines and some of our spiritual practices to connect and support us in connecting with that wisdom, right? But it's there. We just need to get out of our own way and stop letting, society get in our way and come back to our truth, our trust, our wisdom and community. And yes,
I love that.
Yes.
I love that you're doing that work. It really makes my heart sing.
Yeah, it's been really interesting how I've come to it too. I mean, we're speaking to the exact same thing, but I've seen it through just the food piece. My clients just being so riddled with anxiety and fear because there's conflicting advice everywhere you look. You should intermittent fast. You shouldn't intermittent fast, right? You should eat some carbs. You shouldn't eat any carbs. And it's all of this is just so confusing because we're not in tune with what works for our body, right? And what works for mine is going to be different than yours and all these pieces. But ultimately it's coming back to the body, right? As the source of wisdom, and knowing that we are the medicine, we are the spirit, right? And
and it's a long, long, long journey when we start to take our power back in that way, because that's really what you're talking about.
Yeah,
you're talking about taking your power back, and what woman has not been through the struggle of body dysmorphia and our relationship with food, which is really our relationship with Mother Earth. It's relationship with our feminine.
Yeah, fully. So beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Angela. I can't believe how time has just flown by. I want to be respectful of your time. This has been a powerful, beautiful conversation. I so appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom and your gifts and your energy and your nervous system with us. If anybody's really connecting with what you said and obviously dying to come up here to Canada to visit you and then come visit me and hang out in this beautiful part of the world, where can people come and connect with you and just learn more about what you're doing? And
Thank you. My website, and I'm one of those people that my website is never up to date because I'm so freaking busy, but it's just angelaprida.com. So it's my name, angelaprida.com. Instagram is a good place to find me, Angela Prida on there. Facebook, Angela Prida. It's just my name. There you go. You can find me there. Yeah.
I'll make sure all those links, of course, are in the show notes below, so you don't have to memorize any of that. But really strongly encourage everybody who might be curious or has questions to reach out to Angela, to come up here, do some of this amazing work. And just thank you for everything that you're doing, Angela, in the world. It's so needed. And I'm so grateful to know you and to continue, hopefully, in the future working with you. And just so blessed.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenny. It's been a really, really rich conversation and so lovely for me to hear so much of what you're holding in the world. And I know that you're at the brink of this rite of passage, and I'm really excited for you. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. And thank you, everybody, for tuning into another episode. We'll, of course, see you on the next one. Bye, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and share this episode with someone you love. It helps me incredibly reach more people and help more women who need this information. And if you're ready to go deeper into discovering your unique root causes and patterns keeping you hooked on sugar year after year, be sure to come and check out the brand new free root cause quiz that will give you actionable items to finally begin healing your relationship with sugar from the inside out. You can find the link to download this quiz and other amazing resources in the show notes below. I also wanted to just take a quick minute to share a disclaimer. The information provided in this podcast is for general purposes only and is not at all intended to be professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And as much as I do my best to bring you up-to-date and accurate information, please remember that I'm also sharing my opinions, stories, and ideas that are ultimately not supported by mainstream science. My personal advice should not be taken as professional advice, and you are always encouraged and advised to consult with your own healthcare practitioner before making any changes to your health and wellness routine. This podcast is intended to inspire and offer you alternative views to healing your relationship with food, mind, and body. It is up to each listener to take responsibility for their own health and wellness decisions. I hold no liability or responsibility for your results or lack thereof. Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast, and we can't wait to see you in the next episode. Let's go.